Good evening, Facebook family. Um, I'm Tamara Ann, and I will be going live in just about a minute. Still coming live about Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I was here last week, Tuesday, and so I will be coming back every month because I want for people to be educated about domestic violence, what's going on, and so it's 5:59. I'll give about another minute and see if we have some people that are able to join us, and then I will be getting started. All right, I'm going to see if anyone's going to be joining us. About another minute. Okay, I see somebody came on. That one person that's on, I can't see you. So can you send me a text message and let me know that you can hear me okay? And then I'll be getting started. Always got to figure this out, the technology. Okay, I don't see a message. Can you send me a message in the chat? I want to see if it comes up to let me know you can hear me okay. Okay, well, let's see. One more minute. I saw someone come on. I'm not sure if you're able to, I'm not sure if you're able to hear me. Let me see what that means. Okay. I don't think that's anything, so. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. My name is Tamara Ann, and I am the author of Married into Police Brutality. I was here last week. I think I launched October 1st, which sets off Domestic Violence Awareness Month as well as Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And I believe there's also some other awarenesses that are honored or announced or talked about in this month. But I'm going to start off with domestic violence, and then at the end, I will talk about breast cancer. I just finished a journey with breast cancer, and I believe that the two of those have some sort of connection together. So I will finish with that, and then I mentioned I have someone that's going to interview me and someone else who is the daughter of a police officer to share through her eyes of what it was like having a father that was a police officer. So tonight is night 2, and I just want to say good evening to everyone and thank those who are joining in with me tonight. Let me see, I think I need to get situated a little bit better. Okay, again, this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I will be sharing my story of domestic violence that I experienced while being married to a police officer for 22 years. I am encouraged. I must say I'm encouraged because every time someone shares something that I share, a story that I share, I get calls from other ex-wives of police officers that thank me for being courageous and transparent to share because they too suffered many of the same sort of, not this exact same situation, but the same type of domestic violence in their marriage. And so thank you to those women who have assured me that I am not alone in this and that this is a pandemic that needs to be addressed. I believe I talked about it last week when I shared an article from a police department in Arizona that was stating that it is now coming out that domestic violence is very high with police officer families. So one of the goals for me telling my story, the main goal is to see therapy become mandated. And that's really real to me. When I was in my early 20s, I worked at a very prestigious investment banking company, and we were all mandated to attend therapy. It was not an option. And so it always just, I don't get it. Like investment banking, they're mandated because back in the day, Some stockbrokers had committed suicide because of stressful events that occurred. So my company was very preventive. It was an amazing company. And that's when I learned to embrace and appreciate therapy. So not to disgrace law enforcement officers, but it's about so that they can get the care that they need. They desperately need mental health care. So I would also like to see law enforcement families receiving the care and support that they need as well. And that means wives and children of law enforcement officers. So there are many women throughout the world that are victims of domestic violence, but I am shining a light on an area that I believe that can be a foundation for change in our nation. If police officers can surrender to getting the mental and emotional care they need, just maybe more men would follow suit. Because police officers, they have a certain image, they're strong, and if they're mandated and they attend therapy and some sort of support, then I just think that we'll see a big change in our world. There's a lot of stuff in the media right now about mental health and things going on with domestic violence and people in power and control. And we need to see a change. So last week I covered what domestic violence is. I gave the background of what domestic violence is. It's with an intimate partner relationship where one person takes power and control over the other person. I discussed the types of abuse, power and control descriptions, and trauma bonding. So if you did not get to watch that video, it's still in my thread and you can go back and watch it. It was some great information. As I shared, I'm a student and I've learned so much about so much to bring healing to my own life that I want to give it back. So great information, especially trauma bonding. I found trauma bonding because it's an addiction and people sometimes judge victims like, why do they stay? And most of us women are empaths, you know, where we have great empathy and we will feel more sorry for our abuser. And so as I shared, being married to a police officer, you have great empathy because you know what they're going through. So you get tied up in that trauma bond and you're not able to leave for several reasons. So that was really good information that I shared last week. So tonight I'll be covering chronic stress and PTSD. If time permits, I'll go into some other things. I may have to do it next week because I want to take my time to talk about chronic stress, PTSD, and multiple personality disorders and narcissistic personality disorder, how they all are connected. So I'm very grateful. Also, I want to give a shout out to Breathe for Change. I found Breathe for Change while working as a PE coach in a middle school. They had a program to become a social emotional learning facilitator and yoga instructor. So I'm like, hey, that'll be something great that I can bring to my students, you know, yoga during PE. But it turned out that they have the first master's of education and it's social emotional learning, mindfulness with a certification in transformative teaching and leadership. And so I'm so excited. The first class that I just started when school started back up was on trauma. So I'm still learning and growing and just excited that what I learn, I can give back to others. So we'll learn that. We'll talk about that tonight. So what is stress? Stress is a state of worry or mental tension caused by a difficult situation. Stress not treated can lead to trauma. Everyone experiences stress, and everyone experiences trauma. Healing is possible for everyone. So chronic stress is grinding stress that wears people away day after day, year after year. It wreaks havoc through long-term attrition. And then attrition is too much for our system to hold. There is too much time spent in panic zone. So that's what takes you from chronic stress into post-traumatic stress disorder. There's too much time spent in panic zone. You're just, you know, we say fight and flight. You're stuck in fight in that panic zone. And that's what leads to PTSD. So again, I'm sorry. Attrition is the action or process of gradually reducing the strength or effectiveness of someone or something through sustained attack or pressure. So that's when it was saying long-term attrition. So when you are just constantly in stress and you're not getting the necessary health care that you need, you can end up with post-traumatic stress disorder. So the definition of trauma is too much stress, too fast, or too soon for our systems to navigate. This is how I ended up with PTSD. By the end of my marriage, he was totally toxic from not getting the proper mental, emotional, and psychological care that he needed. His self-destructive behaviors were moving so fast that I was unable to keep up. It was nonstop, and the abuse towards me had become unbearable that I didn't know if I was coming or going. I was trying to hold everything together, as we women do, until I finally broke mentally and emotionally. My soul was shattered, and I'll share later what incident shattered my soul and left me fighting to be healed from post-traumatic stress disorder. In the beginning of our marriage, I was unaware that the behavior that I was experiencing was domestic violence. Belittling and criticizing was a part of his character. He liked to make jokes about people that were unkind. His response would be that he's just playing. To the outsiders who got it when they saw him, the effects to them was probably different. But for me, it was a challenge because it was daily and it was regularly. I'm sorry, give me a second. I lost my... Oh, there we go. Today I've learned that sort of behavior is emotional abuse, and it's used to extract a person's identity. It was subtle, and I was often told that I'm too sensitive. It wasn't as obvious as a big abuse. However, one that was obvious in the beginning of our marriage occurred just 6 months after we married, when one of his partners was killed in a motorcycle accident. This was a very difficult time for him. Also, he had lost a very close friend years prior in a police chase where 2 police officers were in a chase and ended up crashing head on, leaving several officers dead. This incident, on top of every other unhealed trauma, caused him to go out drinking. So he went out drinking after that incident. But like I said, there were so many other traumas that were there. So I'm spiritual. He knew that when he married me. I was so concerned on how to help him. So I called our pastor and I asked if he could come and help him. He agreed that him and his wife would come. So I made a pan of enchilada casserole that we could eat while they fellowshipped. When I spoke with my now ex-husband, I could tell that he was extremely drunk. So he was out. He was supposed to come back and be there to receive the help that I had set up with our pastor to come and support him. And so when I called to see when he was going to return home, you know, you can tell when someone's extremely drunk. And so I was concerned with his driving. And he didn't really want to come. He didn't really want to come back. Drinking was what he wanted to do. So last week I shared that the Buy-in Treatment Center reported that police officers have the highest rates of alcoholism amongst any other profession and the highest rates of suicide. So once I learned that and I think back to that incident, that is how he dealt with the stress from the job. It was drinking, and sometimes the drinking would go to a level that was extreme. So I was 29 years old at the time, and I had no knowledge of the things that I've learned today. He was very unhappy with the way that I was trying to support him in this situation. So drawing close to God is the only way that I know how to make it through a rough season. And so as a wife, that's what I was trying to give to him. I was trying to give to him God. So I called our pastor, but that's not what he wanted. That wasn't the tools that he had learned on how to cope with stressful events. So he finally came home, and when he walked in the door, he was furious and enraged. And I was in the kitchen, and he aggressively walked and stood in my face, angry, cursing at me and calling me derogatory names. He then picked up the casserole pan of enchiladas and he threw it against the wall. The glass pan shattered, and luckily I'd already called the pastors and his wife to cancel, because I knew that when I heard him on the phone that he was drinking, that wasn't going to happen. So he blamed me for his actions and violence towards me. It was my fault in his eyes. And it wasn't until the end of the marriage we went to a therapist through the department, and that incident came up, because I guess it was a trauma. I didn't feel it as much as the current traumas because it had happened 21 years ago. But it was still a trauma. It was still something that I had to bring up to her to discuss, because he assured me that I was responsible for the abuse, the derogatory names, for the throwing of the enchiladas against the wall, and just his whole behavior. And at 29, sometimes I've always been self-seeking and self-searching, that sometimes you might want to self-examine and say, did I do something wrong? But you know what? I think I said it last week. Abuse is never okay. Abuse is never okay. So at 29, I fell for it. I was a little guilty, but she explained to him, she said she was just concerned about you. That wasn't control. He felt that I was trying to control him. So I do want to say that I realize that many police officers, and talking to other police officers' wives, that their perception of life changes after dealing with whatever they deal with for so long. They see things differently. And so there was always tension and constant domestic violence, constant telling me that the way that I think is crazy. And that was it. So like I said, the first real big one was just the irate. Like I said, daily, daily I experienced domestic violence like the majority of the days of the marriage. But the big ones, they were, far and few until we got to the end of the marriage. So in 2000, there was an officer shooting that left a transient woman dead. And my ex-husband had witnessed the shooting. He was asked to testify on what he had witnessed. However, it was not in favor of the department. He saw no just cause for what happened. And so the stress and drama that this incident brought into our home was so toxic. I did my very best to support and love him through the challenge he faced with the department and himself. However, at the end of 2001, I began to battle vertigo. The doctors couldn't find out the cause, so they sent me to behavioral science. And I stayed in therapy like most of our marriage just for my mental and emotional health. He was miserable at his job, and he seemed not to be able to get past the retaliation that he went through with the department, and how he felt ostracized by other officers for breaking the code of silence. He was considered a whistleblower. Okay. So, I was the target of his self-hate and anger. He saw this reality show one day where this guy would come out to help you, and he applied, kind of like those, those shows where you do, but this one was where there was a coach, and if you, just whatever life skills or whatever you were going through, he would come out and help you. So he applied, and they picked him up. So during the talk show, one of the first things that the guy asked him, he said, "Why am I here today? Why did you have me to come today?" And my ex-husband's response was, "Because I can't see myself." He says, "I don't know if I'm being normal. I don't know if I'm flying off the tip at my family, and I just get fed up." He said, "I got a good wife. I got a real good wife, and I thank God she has even stayed with me." And so I just don't want to be unfair in how I act with my family because they are victims just like I am. But no one is treating them. I got to come home with this garbage on my back, and they get to feel that. For what? So the host asked, what's that making you feel? And my ex's response was like a tyrant. You know, and while we were doing that show, it was very rough for me because it was Hollywood. You know, it was surface. I always carried a face and kept, tried to keep myself together and keep my children and all that and hold the family together. And I was so frustrated because I felt like, here it is, they're coming from Hollywood. They're putting this show together. He's getting to say these good things, but that's not reality. Behind closed doors, he admitted he was a tyrant. He didn't feel like himself. He had a good wife, a really good wife, was a statement that he made, but that's not how I was treated. And when the guy left, I felt like there was no help. You know, it was just a TV show. It was Hollywood. So after a commercial break, the host asked him, why was he torturing me? And his response was that he was being selfish. He shared how he was walking around in pain and he felt no one else felt what he was dealing with. The host told him that he owed me an apology, that he needed to give me an apology. So further, the talk show host asked him if he needed to feel closure with the department, and his response was that an apology would be nice. So the talk show host said to him, you're not going to get an apology. Are you going to wait for an apology? And my ex's response was no. So the talk show host, and it was laughter like, why am I sitting here waiting on an apology that I'm not going to get? And so he asked him again, did it matter to him if he didn't get an apology from the department and how they treated him when he testified against them and spoke his truth, and how they tried to disgrace him and, for their own reasons. And so he said no. So, as I watched that video and I typed these things out and I knew that I wanted to share that tonight, it's so ironic to me that what he expressed, he went through, that somehow in the domestic violence, he transferred all that to me. From that moment, nothing changed. The only thing that changed, that he was redeemed and he got his position back. They had demoted him for testifying against them. But what I carried, all that he said, the anger, the hate, the this and that. And so today for me, and living with post-traumatic stress disorder, I feel like I'm going through what he went through. That I'm waiting for him to apologize to me. And that's not going to happen. Because as he said earlier in that video, that he was selfish. And so he transferred it over to me. The host said, you don't want that apology. He said, you don't want that apology, man. Your morals are second to none. You're letting people who have questionable morals dictate. And my ex-husband chimed in and said, because they have a badge and a gun. So let me say what he was saying in that. The coach was saying, so you're putting these people on a pedestal because they have a badge and a gun. So to wives who experience domestic violence at the hands of their police officer husbands, we feel the same way. We feel like nobody really listens to us, that we're looked at as crazy women, and they're looked prestigious because they carry a badge and a gun. And a couple weeks ago, I went to go see the play Hamilton downtown. And I didn't know anything about Hamilton, but I learned that it was about the military and the foundation of the military. And Alexander Hamilton had kind of went off, and slept around in his marriage, and how back then men were disgraced that were in the military. Like his son was looked down upon because of what his father had done. And I said, wow, we're so far from that. Because there's a badge and a gun, it's just something innate in us. our children, they're going to look at him greater than me because he has a badge and a gun. And so that's what the guy was saying to him. The host was saying to him, like, you care about them. You're the ones with the morals. You're the one who told the truth. You're the one who said what you saw and broke the code of silence and didn't care. And so he also mentioned to him that his identity, he said, so your identity is in being a police officer. And he agreed that it was. But he left saying he didn't feel like he was vindicated. So in 2001, we moved from the city to a rural area. And he had now had to commute to work, which took about an hour. And this, I believe, added to his stress. So just before we had moved, he had decided to slow down on his drinking. He was doing very well. He would only drink if we went on a family vacation. And so it didn't change his character, but it was at least a start somewhere. And I was very happy about that the drinking, that, you know, his relationship with God, he said that God had told him he needed to slow down on his drinking. So I'm a prayer warrior. So I'm like, yay, you know, my prayers are being answered. But when we moved to a rural town, he started hanging with a new group of people, and he picked up his drinking back again. And when he picked it back up this time, it became a little bit heavier, and even more so than before. So with the drinking came pornography, hanging out in clubs, coming home late, and being very disrespectful, very abusive. And so I began to beg him to get help. His meanness towards me had elevated so high. I would tell him that I couldn't stay married to him if he didn't get the help that he needed. So at that time, like I said, I didn't know what I was dealing with. I just knew that it was ugly and it was evil. No one really knew what I was going through behind closed doors because I fought hard to keep the family image. He would complain to his friends that I would say I can't stay married to him. Unfortunately, no one in his circle could help him. So what I mean by that is, you know, if things are going on that nobody's not really knowing about, you know, like I said, I've spoken to a lot of wives and the drinking and the different things. And a lot of times these men drink and they're abusive and they don't even remember that they were abusive the next day. And then they're looking at you like, why are you tripping? So I would be upset, and he would complain to people, but he would never, really let them know what was going on. It was just like this wife who's threatening me that she don't think she can stay married to me anymore. But it was because the domestic violence and the different things had began to elevate. So he began to curse me out in front of our daughters and their friends, degrading me and putting me down, saying hurtful things. He became very mean and ugly towards me and very disrespectful. Things were being revealed and the marriage was about to come to an end. So we found a marriage retreat that we decided to go to. And it was really funny because they did a personality assessment on both of us. And my assessment came out that, I'm kind of like free-spirited. I like peace. And his came out that he likes a good argument. So he was arguing with them that they did my assessment wrong. And they were assuring him, no, her assessment's correct. And he's like, no. And they made a comment to him like, well, she had to become somebody else to survive living with you. That's not who she is. So at the end of the marriage, one of the things that I think caused a lot of trauma to my spirit, when I was saying at the beginning, I was talking about what stress is, what chronic stress is, how we lead into trauma, how we lead into post-traumatic stress disorder. So one night we were going to the sushi bar because when we came back from this little marital retreat, they told us to go on dates and stuff like that. But he was hanging out with a friend before our date. And when he came to pick me up, I could tell that he had been drinking a lot. So I noticed that there was a bottle of open alcohol in the front seat of the car. And so, out of concern, I said something to him again, like, hey, like, you have an open bottle of alcohol in the front seat. And he basically said he knew. So where we live in this rural town, it's sheriffs patrol this area. So it's been said that the sheriffs out here, they aren't as lenient with officers that get caught drinking and driving. that, you know, you will get in trouble, you'll get written up, you'll get suspended and whatever else. So I feel like, okay, so let me help him because whatever's going on, like this is a little bit too much. So he became very upset with me and began to curse at me and tell me that he was grown, he did not need my help, that I was a helpmate, that he didn't ask me for my help. But he said it in a volume that was extremely abusive, hitting the steering wheel, and just being irate towards me with domestic violence. You know, some people don't ever have to hit you. You know, I was reading, they said 70% of police officer wives experience domestic violence. 40% experience it physically. But believe me, the training that they get, the verbal judo classes, the diffusing people, and all the things that they learn, they don't have to hit you, because I promise you, the emotional abuse is so damaging that I wouldn't say that I want someone to hit me, but I would almost rather for someone to hit me and that bruise go away than the scars and the trauma that emotional, psychological, verbal abuse does and cause trauma to your soul, your mind, and your emotions. And just telling me like, shut the F up, hitting the steering wheel. So I talked about the really big one in the beginning. That was a really big one. This was the next one that was really big, like, you know, disrespecting me and calling me out of my name in front of our daughter's friends. You know, the domestic violence became very, very high. The drinking became very high. I would notice, you know, the stress from the job. He would come home and just take little shots, you know, because his stress level, like he said in his video on that reality show, that he felt like a victim, but we were also his victim. So, you know, we leave the sushi bar and things like that. And he was disrespectful at the sushi bar, cursing me out in front of people. You know, you said a sushi bar is not like sitting at a table, and people could hear him cursing me out and being disrespectful and drunk and just, irate. So I've decided to go sit in the car, and I didn't really have anybody that lived in the area that I could call to ask to come get me. So I had to sit and wait for him to come and get me. And he got on the phone and he called somebody just like arrogant. You know, I think I shared it last week, the entitlement, the things that they go through, you know, and then they bring it home. But they go through a lot. But it was funny because I was talking to someone, to a dentist, and I was having empathy and saying they go through so much. And he said, but it's still not a reason to abuse their wives, because he knew 2 police officer wives that had been physically abused. And I said, well, wasn't physically abused, but he just said, you know, there's no excuse. So we were scheduled to go on a vacation to Europe. His uncle had bought us a trip to Europe because we both had graduated from college, and that was our trip. And so after that little incident that he did to me with cursing me out and just hitting the steering wheel and just being abusive, I just said to him, you can let your uncle know that I won't be going on that trip. So the next day I could hear him on the phone telling all his friends, she's an ungrateful, bitch. You know, not telling anybody what happened the night before, but roaming the earth about me. Like I said, kind of how they made him feel when he testified, and nobody believed him, and they believed everyone, is kind of how I felt like he began to roam the earth about me and say bad things. But this is the same man that said I was a good wife, and just, you know, said I wasn't going to go and was saying she's an ungrateful whatever and things like that. So he called his uncle and he told him that I wasn't going to go. So his uncle called me. He says, I never would really expose him. If someone would call and say something, I didn't really tell them what I went through. I kept it covered. It wasn't until I wrote this book, and even tonight, that I've decided to give purpose to my pain. That's what Danielle Sidney Coakley said. She told me to give, she said, I'm so proud of you for giving purpose to your pain. And so my purpose is to see police officers mandated to therapy. And my girlfriend Regina, she put in a check, because she knows I'm a prayer warrior. I prayed for my ex-husband the entire time we were married. From the time before he left out the door, I was keeping him covered, and I was praying for his safety. I felt like my assignment, you know, I would make sure that I kept our house peaceful. I would worship and try to keep a good atmosphere so that when he came home after being out in all that garbage, at least the home would be peaceful. And then I shared last week too about how officers, when I read the articles, officers bring so much home to their wives that there's tension with their wives. So they're dealing with double stress because they take that stress to work and the stress from work home. And it's just double for them. And maybe that's why he had to go drink and do what he did for however he needed to cope. But like I said, abuse is not okay. If you're a police officer and you're listening, I want to encourage you because it's not mandated. But for you and your family, I want to encourage you. I think a 12-step group is excellent because one of the steps is you realize that you're powerless and that you need someone greater than yourself. And I do believe that in that position, you need someone greater than yourself. In more ways, I have a spiritual father. I'm not going to say his name. And he probably is one of the 30% who does not abuse his wife. He used to try to mentor my ex-husband because he saw that he needed mentoring. But this guy is amazing and he's retired, but he still does his work. He still does his work today, and I compliment him. He knows who he is if he ever listens to this. So, get help because as I shared in the beginning, stress is going to turn into PTSD. And then PTSD, if you look at PTSD, it's the root of so many personality disorders. Bipolar disorder, look it up. But the biggest one that police officers are experiencing is narcissistic personality disorder. And the reason that I believe that narcissistic personality disorder is hitting police officers is because of the identity. Like when my ex said his identity was in being a police officer. So part of the characteristics of narcissism is entitlement, arrogance. You feel like you're above people. And so that untreated, you'll become someone that you're not. And those things can hit you overnight. So I want to encourage you. And if you are in a domestic violent relationship, I want to encourage you that you are not the savior of the world. Because I thought like I could pray, that I could do whatever, that I could stand, that I would be a godly wife. And it just brought more damage to me. We've been apart for 6 years and I'm still healing. And the damage that domestic violence does to an individual is not an easy thing to overcome. But it is overcome. It is something that you can overcome. So I wanted to share that part. And so as one of the things too in domestic violence, like I think once, I would tell him that something's wrong with him, I think I became his worst enemy because that messed with his ego. And so I noticed the abuse became higher and he would do it in front of people. He knew all my triggers. He probably felt like I'm an easy target, like, being a woman of God and kind of innocent and naive to evil. Because I don't comprehend evil, and unless I get really upset, I can be mean when I've gone to that part. So he began to trigger me in front of people to try to disgrace me. I guess to tell people that I was crazy, and I think that was to deflate what he was actually going through and what he was doing. So fast forward, I ended up going on that vacation and we were having a good time, but he went into a gift shop and he bought a watch. And the watch was like overpriced. Like, I'm a good financial person. So when I saw the watch and he told me how much he paid for it, I Googled it and I'm like, that cost a lot. So he decided he was going to take it back. And the receipt said they take no returns back. So we had been out, the boat docked, the ship sailed docked, and we had been out and he had been drinking. And so when he went into the gift shop, he was upset because they were winning. They were winning. Police officers like to win. That's their mindset. I got to go home safe. So it's a mindset of winning. So he was getting so upset that they won because the receipt clearly stated that there was no returns once you left the store. And he was arguing with them. And so I was like, let's deal with this later. You know, like I didn't want to make a big scene. This was a very expensive trip that we had gone on. And I didn't want us to be below the people that were there. And they look at us like, who are they? And so he was so upset with me. That was another time that I experienced a really, really big abuse. He was threatening me, what he would do to me. I better never go against him again. And I wasn't going against him. I was trying to deflate him getting in trouble on the cruise. So those were like domestic violence for me in my marriage. Like I said, it was other little things, but those were really big things. Fast forward, I was turning 50. And so I love the beach, and we had decided that we would rent an RV and we would go to the beach, and I would have a birthday party at the beach. And so I recall, people get the mic and they do little shout outs, and people were giving shout outs. And so he took the mic and he was just telling everybody about how wonderful I was and how much he's put me through being married to him, you know, as a wife of a police officer. And he was talking and talking and talking. And I had to remind him that it was my birthday, because when he turned 50, he had the mic. I don't think I even got to talk, period, when it was his birthday. So I reminded him that it was my birthday and that I would talk. But he did, he would always post up on Facebook that, you know, I was a good wife, and different things like that. That he appreciated me standing by his side. He began to, even cry, in front of people. So, it was just a roller coaster. If you were on last week, I talked about the love bombing, the trauma bond and the love bombing. So whenever there was something that was very bad that was done to me, there was always this great makeup. And I talked about how that becomes an addiction in our brain when someone is abusive to you and then they do something nice. They're abusive to you and then they do something nice. It's very hard to leave because you're addicted. And I shared that if you're in an abusive relationship and you wonder why you're not strong enough to leave, you could possibly be trauma bonded. So look up trauma bonding. There's a organization called the Men Project, and they're a nonprofit organization. You can Google them. They will give you a lot of tools to help you break a trauma bond and be free if you're in a domestic violent relationship. So the abuse continued, and I had filed for a legal separation. Well, I paid the money to file. I hadn't filed, but I paid the attorney the money. I was going to file for a legal separation. And then the next day, our son just so happened to have a seizure. So I put it on hold because I felt like our family needed to stay together during that trying time with our son's illness. So both of us were stressed, just a lot of stress in the household. There was so many police officers that had got killed on the freeway driving to work. I mean, it was a lot of stress. And so that stress comes home and it's just stress and it's toxic, and toxic fights with toxic. He couldn't seem to fight his darkness, and I personally couldn't carry it for him any longer. So our middle child was soon graduating from middle school. And just before her graduation, he came to me and he said that he didn't want to lose his family and that he would go to counseling at the department. And I had been begging, like for years. I had really been begging years, 6 years, please get help, please get help. Like I said, I didn't know anything about narcissistic personality disorder. I later found out that untreated PTSD, like I said, will turn into post-traumatic stress disorder. And if you're a police officer, because of the things that you go through at work with carrying a gun, a badge, your mental capacity to get afflicted with narcissistic personality disorder is, more easier than somebody who's not in that line of duty. There can be bipolar disorder and other things like that. So he agreed. 2 days later was going to be our daughter's graduation party. I was at peace, knowing that he was going to go get the help that he needed. And we're celebrating, and one of his friends comes over, and it was one of his drinking partners, and I was not happy about that. So this was the last day of our marriage. This was the last day. And I can't even say of the domestic violence, because when you co-parent with someone that's abusive, you still kind of go through abuse in small little ways. But the day that I just could not take it any longer was he went in the garage and he began to drink with one of his drinking partners. And my daughter came to me. She asked for some chairs. She needed more chairs for a party. And I went to ask him for help. And I told him that there was he didn't want to help me. And our neighbor was like, help your wife. And so I told him the chairs were at the top of the garage. And so when he went to give me a chair, he threw it at me, like at my feet, like it was a Frisbee. And it hit the bottom of my feet. And that was the day that I decided that I could no longer take another day of abuse from him. I felt like people had to separate us because he was much bigger than me. I felt like if I could have fought him, that I would have. That's how tired I was of the 22 years of domestic violence. And so that's the part I wanted to share tonight. I did share in the beginning about stress, chronic stress, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I want to share that on both ends for the officers and their families. You know, to take care of yourself. Like, I put some stuff out there because that's what I'm doing. You know, other wives have called me again. Like, I was on last week and one of my girlfriends posted it, and I got more calls from wives that experienced not the same situations, but they experienced domestic violence with their police officer husbands. And so I don't want to disgrace them, but like I said, the comment that was made to me is it wasn't my fault. You know, it wasn't my fault that he went through what he went through. And so I encourage you again, find whatever you need to find to get the support that you need. Stress does not discriminate. Post-traumatic stress disorder. I know there are men that have been in the military that may still be battling. And I encourage you to get the help that you need as well. I don't believe that we have to suffer. I believe that God is a healer. I believe that he'll lead and guide and order our steps. Just as I mentioned, I'm in a Master's of Education program, and the first class is about trauma. I had no idea that it was going to be about trauma, but I started thanking God that he led me to that because he wants us healed. He wants us healed. He wants families strong. He wants men strong. He wants women strong. He wants kids strong. And we see so much in the world today that people aren't strong. They're pretending to be strong, but if we really take a look, we need healing. And so I shine a light on this area because this is the area that I'm sharing on. Police officers, I'm going to post a link because I started a petition and I want to ask you to sign it. The petition is to mandate therapy for law enforcement officers. I think that it needs to be mandated. So I'm going to end. I think that's the end. Let me look. I'm going to end. Yes. Tonight was just about trauma. I'm going to come back next week and I'm going to talk about the authority to abuse and what I went through after that day that I lost it with the court system and how they favor police officers and how they, again, so last week I talked about double abuse when I was sharing. So next week I will talk about how this system, our court system, honors that badge and that gun, like the guy was saying, and treats the wives really bad. So there was double abuse, and that's what I'll be sharing next week. I join you to come. I'm inviting you to join next week. I think that'll be a really good week because I think that is something that needs to be discussed as well. The way that many wives are treated in the divorce process, that abuse process, that domestic violence probably is almost equal or more severe than what we experience in a marriage. And the reason why is because you go through all this in a marriage and then it just starts trickling. And that's what it says. Stress, you know, the chronic stress, the PTSD, when it's just too much happening at one time. And so that's what happened. So thank you for joining tonight. I'm going to end. If anybody has a question, you're welcome to put a question in the chat. And next week when we come back, I will answer it for you if you want to ask me any question. But you can ask me, but then I am going to say a quick prayer because my girlfriend Regina, she put in the text in the earlier part that she wants to pray for our police officers. She wrote the foreword in my book, Married into Police Brutality. And it's such an amazing forward because she has already worked with some law enforcement officers and she believes that great change can take place. She's ready to share a 12-step program with them where they could be mandated, like people go to AA. She does body movement with breathing and all that. And she's willing to do her part to see a change be made. So she wants me to pray. Any questions? Any questions? Well, thank you, Felicia. Thank you, Shameen. It's not, an easy thing to do to share or to expose someone. But I've been hearing that 2024 is the year of exposure, and I don't believe that things are being exposed to degrade people. I think that things need to be exposed so that healing can take place, that we really have to fight. I wish I could pick it and get some signs with other police officer wives and pick it in front of wherever we could pick it and say, mandate therapy, mandate therapy. Because my daughter, who's going to be 16 this month, when I created the petition to mandate it, she got over 30 people. And she loves her dad. Children love their dad. And when their dad's in law enforcement, they look up to their dad. But she's aware that therapy needs to be mandated. And so that's what I say. So I'm going to put that in my Facebook. And if you can go and sign that and share it, I would greatly appreciate it because I don't want this labor to be in vain. I don't want my voice to be in vain. I do want to see change. Like I said, so many other people need change also because our whole world, if we're honest about it, there's elephants all over the place. That this world needs to change. People need to be healed. We don't know if those kids that do shoot ups at school, if they're the child of a law enforcement officer and they deal with stress. I've talked to so many children of law enforcement officers and how stressful it was because they don't know how to take that uniform off when they come home. So thank you. Really quick, Regina's not on. I just want to pray. I'm not going to close my eyes. Father God in heaven, I thank you for those that came on to listen and those that maybe will listen later. I thank you that no one feels disgraced if they're in law enforcement and they watch this or that they feel attacked, that I shared my story to bring light on a pervasive issue that is plaguing our society. And it's time for us to heal. It's time for us to heal as a nation. It's time for change to happen. It's time for mental and emotional health to not be something that people look down upon, but to know that it is just a part of who we are and that we need to care for ourselves. So if there's anyone that feels that they abuse or they criticize and they belittle and they make jokes about it and they say that they're just teasing or laughing, that they would realize that that's emotional abuse. Any other thing that I shared that maybe triggered someone or will trigger someone when they watch it, just know that it's not a trigger. It's a call to healing. It's a call to acknowledgement and it's a call to acceptance. That's the first part, God, that I ask that they would not be ashamed, that a woman would not be ashamed to say she's abused and a man would not be ashamed to say that he needs help. And I've heard that it's the other way around too, that there's some abusive women that may abuse. So either way, I just ask that this will no longer be a stigma of shame, but that it will be a stigma of courage and strength to shine the light in the dark places so that healing may occur. And so I thank you, Father, that we will see change. I don't know how long that it will take, but we're asking you and we're coming into agreement that change will happen. So I thank you. We had Harriet Tubman. We had different ones that you used, God, to bring change. And so I thank you that change is going to happen and healing is going to happen. In Jesus' name, amen. So thank you for joining. I'm going to finish. And like I said, I will announce, I will be back next week and discuss authority to abuse. Thank you.